Hey all! With Season of the Guardian just around the corner, now feels like the perfect time to share another update on my spear-centric solo build. This is the build and playstyle I use for soloing elite chest runs and mutated expeditions, and based on the fact it's enabled me to solo a handful of M3s over the past year, I think it's still worth promoting as an easy to pick up, solo-oriented, casual-friendly build. The reason I call it these things is because of its simplicity. The fact that a spear, with its buffs and debuffs, can practically stand on its own, leaving you just 3 abilities and a dodge to master. Maintaining effective uptime on Fortify from the Perforate spear perk is this build's main defensive priority, and also the reason why weapon swaps are generally more risk than they're worth, since this Fortify does not persist through weapon swaps. In the open world, or expeditions below M2, Enfeebling Skewer can be just as strong, but debuff resilience nerfs it into oblivion for anything higher than that. That being said, I'll still run it on armor, and it's absolutely worth having. The other staple of this build is lifestealing and health regen, which I source from 4 places: the artifact ring Blooddrinker, the lifestealing perk on my spear, leeching Cyclone on a piece of armor, and regenerating on an earring. Various sources of cooldown reduction make Fortify maintenance pretty easy, but I still have to be careful and ready with counterplay whenever there are gaps in its uptime. Now, despite the recent nerf that increased the cost of heavy dodge, the spear is still especially great for dodging frequently thanks to its built-in stamina income, which is dependent on crits. I like to run both Keen and Keen Awareness to improve the proc rate of invigorating crits. That way stamina is a bit less delicate and a more reliable resource. But when it comes to finding a good spear, I consider it a win as long as I've got one with Fortifying Perforate and Lifestealing. Moving on to my second ability, with its multiple sources of lifestealing, Cyclone and its corresponding armor perk are major parts of my damage and self-healing. Since it has grit and doesn't require you to be facing an enemy, it's a perfect follow-up to a successful dodge, especially since we get a significant amount of stamina back through Invigorating combo, even more if it crits. It's also great for avoiding combo attacks that I can't fully dodge without depleting, and for countering incoming staggers when I know I've missed time to dodge or left myself otherwise open. For the third skill, I'd recommend 3 out of 4 points in Skewer. I prefer Skewer over the alternative for several reasons. It locks me into a shorter animation than Sweep, its forward lunge keeps me moving so that enemies often miss or need to reposition to hit me, and on top of that it's an excellent gap closer since I'm constantly getting pushed back and shoved. It's also a great escape against abilities like the Varangian Heavy's Shockwave, which can be disastrous because of its stamina drain. That being said, I recognize the appeal of Sweep as a frequently available knockdown with grit, along with a bleed perk that has really strong synergy with certain spear skills and dex bonuses. I'll cover this more in a moment when I get to talking about the Season 5 artifact spear. For attributes, I run 100 strength, 350 dex, and 100 constitution minimum. Anything extra I put into strength or dex for more damage, but it's pretty flexible. Obviously, having the other 2 spear perks on armor is essential, but beyond that my priority is 5 stacks of Enchanted Ward, 4 stacks of Refreshing, and health whenever I can find a piece with all 3. For anyone looking to gear in this direction, I'd recommend getting your hands on some dense mutator materia to craft the Azoth crystal pieces, maybe re-roll them with the 2 spear perks, and then keep an eye on the trading post for cheap pieces with Enchanting Ward and Refreshing. If you'd rather farm than craft or buy, I've seen a lot of near-perfect gear out of Glacial Tarn mutations. The Black Ice Strength set, which drops on M1 and up, always has these 2 perks to start. I still prefer Void Darkplate as my artifact armor, especially since all it takes to make a heavy set into medium is switching over to Featherweight, unless I'm using a shield, in which case I have to take that off too. When it comes to amulets, I prefer stamina recovery with health and/or protection against an element or damage type. The artifact Blooddrinker comes with leeching and hardy built in, but if I didn't have that, I'd probably want a ring with these 2 perks. Azoth Crystal Ring comes to mind, also craftable with dense mutator materia, though I'd have to invest a bit of gold and materials to roll something like Keen Awareness or another decent perk. On my earring, I go for Fortifying Toast and Regenerating for added defensiveness, usually with a stack of Refreshing if I can manage. Since I play Spear in a very standalone way that doesn't involve much weapon swapping, I'd say just about anything can work as a secondary weapon. Bow or throwing hatchet are my favorites when I need access to ranged attacks, but most of the time I'll run a flail and a tower shield. A flail gives me access to a passive health increase through reinforced vitality, and it also gives me access to a knockdown, a gap closer that blocks attacks and gives fortify on hit, and a couple more abilities, warding bludgeon and arcane smite, that give me fortify that persists through swaps even if they don't hit an enemy. Especially on fights like the last one in Empyrean Forge where there's a lot of downtime between incoming attacks, I like to shore up some extra fortify when I can so that I'm less vulnerable. This might seem like a basic thing to cover, but for mutators I'll typically run the same gear for everything, apart from my amulet, and for trash I'll gem for around 50% resistance to whatever the elemental mutation is. For boss fights where it'll actually make a difference, I swap to particular gems like rubies for fire resistance on the bosses in Empyrean Forge, amethyst for void resistance against General Crassus or Archdeacon Azamela, and aquamarine for frost resistance against both bosses in Glacial Tarn. As a bit of an aside, it's impossible not to talk about the upcoming 15% nerf to damage dealt while in heavy equip load. That's something coming with Season 5. I was extremely disappointed to read about it, but I don't think it's going to change my mind about soloing in heavy versus medium, especially since flail and tower shield are my go-to secondaries. That being said, you can expect even more heavy shaming than there already is, but it shouldn't deter you from picking heavy if that's what you like for soloing. Now, I promised I'd talk about an alternate setup for sweep instead of skewer, and I think this is a good place to mention the Season 5 artifact spear, Venom. For those who don't know, such as me until just a few days ago, the coup de grace portion of sweep counts as a heavy attack. That means it procs the dot from Venom, as well as other spear skills such as refreshing reach and defensive stance, though I can't say these two are worth the points. Obviously, you would want the bleeding sweep perk if you run sweep, both for damage and to benefit exposed wounds, since more crits equals more stamina. You could go a few steps further and build a skill tree focused on heavy attacks, which the game definitely tries to support, but it's still going to feel especially bad whenever a heavy attack misses or gets interrupted. That's why I prefer the stab and weave style that I get with the light attack skills. One solution would be to run 300 con for grit on basic attacks, but that comes with its own significant trade-offs, so I don't know if I can recommend that. Speaking of grit and stagger, my go-to heart rune is Stoneform, since it gives me frequent windows of stagger and CC immunity to play around. Brutal offers a small burst of damage that's nice in a pinch, especially since it triggers any life-stealing effects, but Stalwart can be just as effective, and I'm looking to craft that for myself soon. Really quick, I just want to cover a few artifacts I haven't mentioned, though they're not all new. First is Magnetic Gauntlets, which I finally got a while back. The downside to this one is extra punishing because I'm running 2 crit perks, so I'd have to shuffle some perks around to optimize for it, but the main reason to run these gauntlets is to proc invigorating crits more frequently and more reliably. That being said, I haven't found a fight yet that makes me feel like I need it, but that's not to say it can't be a bit of a comfort pick for someone still learning the cadence of attacks and dodges, or simply looking for more stamina income, or waiting to get Void Darkplate. Second is Spark of Mjolnir, the Warhammer artifact, which offers a strong bit of CC if you need it, especially if you're not running sweep. I've only ever run a Spark of Mjolnir lightning setup against Ancients, like in the Aeneid or Lazarus, since they take 30% more lightning damage, but it feels really satisfying, so that's why I mention it. To get value out of this, you'd want a spear gemmed for lightning conversion, along with electrified rune glass and lightning perks to enhance it even more. Bolt Caster could be used similarly, but benefits the spear a little bit less, since the plus 20% lightning on both weapons applies only to basic attacks with Bolt Caster, whereas Spark of Mjolnir increases all lightning attacks. Finally, I just want to mention Featherweight again, since it's the easiest way to go from my heavy solo set to a medium loadout by switching a single piece of armor, and either taking off my shield or just switching secondary weapons. After all, with the upcoming nerf to heavy damage, like I said, an easy switch to medium is about to be a lot more appealing. So that's the build. I think it's simple, forgiving, and it has the flexibility to feel casual even in more difficult content. It might take me an hour or 2 or 5 to solo a mutated expedition, or 20 minutes to kill a single boss on M3, but that's why I like solo play. There's no rush, no pressure, and no accountability. Not to mention there's plenty of mounts and skins to farm until they give us some proper solo content, like repeatable trials, which I hope they do soon. As always, if there's anything I've left out or explained poorly, feel free and leave a question below and I'll try and answer it to the best of my ability. If you'd like to see my build in action, my channel has a bunch of curated gameplay and highlights from some of the expeditions I've been able to complete solo. Until next time, thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.